All right. This is still going to be audio only. Again, eventually we may, like I said, we may have that camera up and going. It's just I have some time to do some additional audio commentary, and the camera is just not available right now. So we'll just continue with the audio. And again, in the near future, may just start this commentary all the way back again with a series of videos. But for now, these are audio commentaries. And we have just started chapter 1. So the one audio commentary, part 1, is the sort of the introduction of the book, and now we're into chapter 1, which is Go-Daigo's intention in the Southern Court. And I say readers of my previous work in praise of spies were introduced to a piece of Japanese political cultural history known as the Go Nancho in the Second Southern Court. Or go. This is a little bit of linguistics for you. Go can mean honorable, but go also means afterwards or second or the later, right? It depends on the kanji, obviously, but go nancho in this case means the Second Southern Court, or go nancho can mean the Southern Court that came after it's like the second, the latter, later, the latter, like the prior and then the afterwards. So like go nancho, the afterwards Southern Court. So the Second Southern Court. So you'd have the nancho, and that would be the original Southern Court, and then the go nancho would be the Second Southern Court. Yeah, and then, like for example, in history, there's the Hojo family, like the Hojo from the Kinmu Restoration, and then later in Sengoku period you have the Hojo, but they're actually the Go Hojo, meaning the second Hojo, or the afterwards Hojo, the Go Hojo. They're not exactly the same direct unbroken family. It's the same family, but it's very kind of like twisty, convoluted, very playing with a lot of like the ways that kinship works in Japan to get it around, and so that's why it's usually just called the Go Hojo, because it is connected to the original Hojo, but again, it's very tedious, pulling at strings, really bending the rules of kinship to get to it. So usually Hojo and Go Hojo. But even though it's Go Hojo, a lot of times when it's written down on formal documents, it's Go Hojo. But again, a lot of times it's also just written Hojo, and no one says Go Hojo. They usually just say Hojo. But it is actually Go Hojo. So this is fairly common. You will see a lot of things where it's go this or go that, and it means that it's somehow connected to the original. It's a revitalization of the original, or the original stopped and then started up again. But like, okay, so say man X starts it, then he quits, and then man X's son, who is Y, decides to start it again, but man X is out of the picture, but now Y has started it, then it's called Go. You see what I'm saying? Or something along those lines. Or man X starts a business, and it's called Spycraft, right? And then and it's around for like 30 years, and then it goes out of business. Well, man X's top employee, Bill, decides to make a few years pass, and he decides to just take everything about it and create it again. And Spycraft is back, but now it's Go Spycraft. You see what I'm saying? It's like that. So Go Nancho is a continuation of the Nancho, but technically the Nancho did end during the treaty, and then when the treaty was broken, then the Nancho came again. But that was the next. See what I'm saying? That's the next Southern Court, or the Second Southern Court. So when you talk about the Southern Court, even if I say Southern Court, you got to remember it's Go Nancho. It's the Second Southern Court. The First Southern Court did end during the treaty, and then it came back. Then the Southern Court arose again a second time. So it's the Go Nancho Second Southern Court. And that's what we're talking about. And then I say it's a topic. It's a topic that's rarely discussed by Japanese scholars because there's been many times in history where it's actually been a forbidden topic. It's a taboo topic, and there's just no way around that. It's more free to talk about it now. You see, there is with time more and more things being published about it, but for a while it's just not something you're just not allowed to talk about it. I mean, the especially like in 1910, I talk about in this book. There's a Shusri Kotoku who in I think it was 1910 or 1911. I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, I think it was 1910. He was talking about the Southern Court, and he was like, "Oh, you know, the Northern Court. I think it's somewhere in here. It's soon in the book. It pops up." And he basically says, like, is this Northern Court not fake? Is the Southern Court not actually the real court? And he was executed for that. So I mean, even in like 1910, he wasn't allowed to openly just talk about that. So, and there's many Japanese historians who brought this up, and their careers took. Not many. I don't like. Oh, there were so many, but there's occasionally been people who have tried to bring this up, and their careers take a nasty hit for it. Right. So, talking about the Gonan Show and the potential for there to be another emperor in Japan is just it's a taboo topic. I'm not going to say that they're not going to hunt you down and kill you because you're talking about it, right? Because it's 2015, but it's still socially a taboo topic. However, because I don't really care about that kind of taboo, I'm just openly talking about it like it's nobody's business, like it's everybody's business. You know, everybody needs to know about the Second Southern Court. But specifically, I discuss it now because it's a critical context for the history surrounding the manual. This entire book is to give you the translation of the manual and to give you commentary to the manual. And in order to give you commentary to the manual, you have got to understand the Gonan-sho, the Second Southern Court. It's a critical piece because the people involved in making the Fukushima-ryu are Gonan-sho Chushin, whatever. You know, they are Southern Court loyalists. Loyal retainers, right? So I just do a real brief overview of this. If you need to know more about the Nanbokucho, you should probably go and research it on the internet. And I hate to say that, I hate to say go to the internet, but it's fairly well documented. The Kenmu Restoration, Emperor Go-Daigo, Ashikaga Takuiji, Kusunoki Masashige. Kusunoki Masashige is actually, in some places, he's like some websites have good information on him, right? But honestly, just be careful because the majority of the information about Kusunoki Masashige is myth. It's a lot of BS. He died in 1336, and then hundreds of years later he became a symbol of something that he probably wouldn't have actually stood for, you know. But anyway, he became a symbol of a loyal retainer dying to the very end. But it wasn't like he was a loyal retainer because he was a mindless puppet or something. He was a loyal retainer to the emperor, all right? And the irony of that is that later on in history, the Northern Court emperors would use him as a symbol to get people to follow them, which is actually a deep insult because Kusunoki Masashige died defending the Southern Court emperor, not the Northern Court emperor. So it's to be honest, it's some pretty green shit that the Northern Court emperors utilized him as propaganda. It's some pretty green shit. But anyway, so yeah, Go-Daigo. So this story really begins during the Kenmu Restoration. Kenmu Restoration, in a real brief summary, the House of Hojo. Remember earlier I talked about Hojo and then Go-Hojo. So the House of Hojo in the 1300s basically had ripped the country away from the emperor, and the government was basically run by almost like a military-industrial complex. Martial law, like the military is just married to the everything, right? And Go-Daigo said, no, that's not going to happen. The country doesn't need to be a military-industrial complex. It doesn't need to be run by the military. It's going to be run back by civil administration. And then the military is going to serve the civil administration. So that's the Kenmu Restoration. So he came through, and this is truly where Kusunoki Masashige is at in history. they always claim him in the Nanbokucho, but he dies at the very beginning of Nanbokucho. Kusunoki Masashige was the hero of the Kenmu restoration. That is when Go Daigo regains power from the Hojo. So the Hojo are beaten and their house falls, and Emperor Go Daigo takes control of the country. Everybody's a winner, yay, you know. But then Ashikaga Takuiji, one of Kusunoki Masashige's like co-generals, like one of the guys next to him in terms of rank and everything, basically decides that even though they just ousted the Hojo, he wants the same position the Hojo just had, which is shogun. And Go Daigo Tenno is not going to give it to him. He doesn't want him to be shogun. He's like, we just ousted the Hojo. And then Ashikaga's like, well, you know, then so summarizing this very simply, Ashikaga creates a new court with an emperor of his choosing, and he basically says, this is the court that's going to run Japan now, and that emperor says I'm shogun. And then the Nanbokucho, the period of the North and South, begins. The northern court being the fake court, the southern court being the real court. And at the very beginning of this fight is when Kusunoki Masashige dies. Like, if he didn't die right at the beginning of the fight, then things may have been very different. But he ended up stuck in a battle that he was not prepared for. He knew he wasn't prepared for it. He knew he wasn't going to win. He knew that Ashikaga Takuiji was using the same tactics as him. He knew that he knew his tactics. He knew, you know, and he ends up basically getting stuck on in a totally bad position, and he knows he's going to die, and it's obvious. But I mean, that's what happens when your brother at arms betrays you. The odds of you dying are really high, okay? Because he knows what you know. He knows your tricks. He knows what you're gonna do. So that was like the first thing, you know. Kusunoki was Masashige dying. So when we talk about the Nanbokucho period and we talk about Kusunoki, we're really talking about Kusunoki Masashige's sons. And then later on we'll talk about Kusunoki-ryu, and it's really from his sons that Kusunoki-ryu comes into being. And as a matter of fact, the tradition that everyone always calls, oh, it's Kusunoki-ryu, it's really named, like it's recorded in manuals as Kusunoki Masanori-ryu, not Kusunoki Masashige-ryu. Later on it's called Kusunoki-ryu Gungaku, but really it's Kusunoki Masanori-ryu. So that's something people need to kind of learn. Whenever they think of Kusunoki-ryu, they're thinking of Masashige, but really it's Kusunoki Masanori. This is kind of something people need to start really banging into their heads. Kusunoki's oldest son, Masatsura, was also sort of given all of this, but he dies. So there's nothing really much for him to pass down. Masanori lives till old age, has kids, passes things down. Kusunoki-ryu really comes from Masanori. So, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So let's see, we've talked about the Kenmu restoration, Go Daigo. Okay, so then 1390s, a peace treaty was reached between the two courts, and that's when the southern court and the northern court technically came to an end. The northern court broke the treaty soon after. So here's where like the taboo topics begin. In normal Japanese history, the northern court breaks the treaty. There's a brief uprising from the southern court, and it just dissipates, right? But like I put at this page, this is false. That's not really what happened. What really happened is that the southern court reorganized after the treaty was broken and formed the Go Nansho, the second southern court. This court began a consistent resistance of both ideology and military campaign against the northern court pretenders from the late 1300s till this very day. During the 1400s, the Go Nansho was behind the assassination of an Ashikaga shogun. When you read, now, this is the thing, when you research regular history, you're going to it's not going to say the Go Nansho assassinated the Ashikaga shogun in the 1400s. You're going to hear so-and-so, There was a riot one night, there was an attack, so and so cut the head off the shogun, blah blah blah. And there's no background to it. It's just like he did it, he did it, he did it, the end, right? Very few records. This is where you have to get into, like, I will, as I talk later on, like Taiheki Hidensho, sort of like the secret the secret Taiheki, or the alternate Taiheki collections, right? And is when it talks about, like, it explains exactly who that was, why he did it, what the plan was, what technique was being used, all the planning that involved it, da 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 da. So, like, there's, what I'm saying, there's the regular history, and then there's, like, the Southern Court history. And then anyway, so the conflict between Hosokawa and Yamana, which incited the Onin War, has roots in the Go Nansho campaign as well. Research the Onin War, and then after that you look at the Southern Court's records, and it explains why each of those things happened and how it was related. And I'm not saying that the Go Nansho started the Onin War. I'm saying that the Onin War was due to a series of events, and some of those events were related to Go Nansho activity. And the country breaks into the Onin War. I also talk about the loyalists stealing articles of imperial regalia. This is a taboo topic completely, because I'm openly saying, that the imperial regalia is not where the Japanese government claims that it's at. If you really think that Kusanagi is in Atsura Shrine, then fine, you can go ahead and keep believing that if you want to. If you want to really, you know what I mean? Like, and that's not even a Go Nansho thing. There's many scholars who are like, that sword is not there. It's just not there. But the point is that there's the sort of socially accepted narrative, and then there's all of the history and evidence and passed down stories that contradict the socially accepted narrative. So the socially accepted narrative is that all the imperial regalia is intact, and the Southern Court loyalists say no, it is not, right? It's either missing, or what is being held as the regalia is actually a fake replica that was made basically as a dummy device. Like, they think that they're recovering the mirror, but it's not the real mirror. They think they're recovering the sword, but it's not the real sword. They think they're recovering the gem, the jewel, but it's not the real jewel, like that. The necklace, like the necklace of supposedly like the necklace of all the little Magatama jewels or whatever, the little kama shaped things. The necklace, the jewel necklace, the mirror and the sword, all of the imperial regalia, supposedly, but it's not. The question is it really there? Like, do they have the real one, or is that either completely missing, or is there a replica? So accepted history says that all of the regalia is safe and fine in the shrines, and then alternative history, or Southern Court history says no, it is not. So the reason I'm discussing that here is because I want the reader to understand that that the Japanese history is not black and white. It's not like other countries have complex histories and Japan has an easy, clean history. Japan's history is just as convoluted and covered up and rewritten and just multi-layered as any other country out there. That's what I'm trying to say. That's really what I'm trying to get at. I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theory this or political agitation this. I'm just trying to say that you, the reader, needs to know that Japan's history is just as complex as any other country. And there's multiple layers and multiple perspectives and multiple versions of what happened and da 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 da. Don't just swallow the socially accepted history, without critically thinking about all the other possibilities, because for every story out there, there's 2 or 3 versions of what happened. And I'm just asking you to be open to the fact that there's 2 or 3 versions. And then I go on. Okay, so then I go on to talk about the Southern Court loyalists felled Oda Nobunaga's forces. This, and then we know Nobunaga ultimately crushed the Ashikaga shogunate. I talked about that in Praise of Spies. We know Nobunaga, there's just no way around that. Nobunaga had a lot of Southern Court loyalists in his ranks. He had no problem crushing the shogun. Is it, it was in his best interest to crush the shogun, so he probably did it just because he wanted to. But even if he did it only because he wanted to, it's got to put a smile on the Southern Court loyalist faces when their feudal lord destroys their old enemy. And then I talk about one of the major military systems associated with the Southern Court loyalists was Kusunoki-ryu, because Kusunoki-ryu was born and raised among the loyalists. And the main root text collectively. Now, when I say Taiheki Hidensho is collective, there is no one document called Taiheki Hidensho. Taiheki Hidensho is like a name called the Secret Tradition of the Great Peace, or the Chronicle of Great Peace, the Taiheki Hidensho. It's an alternate Taiheki, whereas the socially accepted Taiheki is a document, one document, many chapters, but it's one document. The Taiheki Hidensho is like a name for the collection. Basically, all the Southern Court manuals and records and histories and diaries are collectively called Taiheki Hidensho. So it is an alternate Taiheki, but it is not a single document. It's a collection of all kinds of documents. Like I said, it's not just a collection of its history, diaries, war manuals, charts, etc., etc., etc. And so I basically bring that up because many, so of course, obviously, during the Sengoku period, many non-Southern Court loyalists have some kind of version of Kusunoki-ryu, but it doesn't negate the fact that Kusunoki-ryu was born and raised within the Southern Court mindset, and that Southern Court loyalists in the Sengoku period also still had Kusunoki-ryu. So yes, you have people who don't give a shit about the Southern Court that have it, but the Southern Court guys still have it as well. So right, it's spanned out some, so that's important to understand, because some people would say, well, there's lots of people that had it that didn't give a shit, but again, that's irrelevant. It's not relevant to the point. Point is a lot of people had Kusunoki-ryu that didn't give a shit about Southern Court, fine, but the Southern Court loyalists still had Kusunoki-ryu, or some variation of Kusunoki-ryu. And like I said, the main line of Kusunoki, and then the main line is Kusunoki Masatora in the late 1500s. Kusunoki Masatora is the direct descendant of Masashige, right? Of Masanori, right? Masashige to Masanori, down to Masatora. Masatora is Oda Nobunaga's retainer. I mean, you know what I mean? He serves Oda Nobunaga. So you've got Nobunaga's ranks Nobunaga has so many Southern Court loyalist samurai serving him, and he has the head of Kusunoki-ryu, the main line, serving him. So that's something that historians really need to pay attention to, but a lot of historians won't pay attention to it, because in order to acknowledge that Nobunaga had this tradition within his ranks would mean that you'd have to acknowledge that the Southern Court dynamic was still at play. A lot of historians refuse to do that. That's why Nobunaga's having all these Southern Court guys in his ranks is completely just not even talked about. So I continue on. I talk about Yui Shosetsu, who did the Kien Revolt. I talked about that in Praise of Spies too. I bring it up here again because he was the head of one of the Kusunoki-ryu Gungaku that comes through Kusunoki Fuden. And he was the head of that, and as the head of that school, he led the Kien Revolt. The revolt didn't succeed, but it did cause a lot of social reform. So in a way, it did succeed. It didn't succeed fully, but it had a measure of success. And then I talk about things that happened. Then next, I'm talking about, you read this part about Kumazawa Taisen. This is all from 1900s. So I'm putting this in here to remind people that the Southern Court issue, the Northern Court Southern Court issue, is still valid. Like it's even in the modern times, the 1900s, things are still taking place regarding this issue. This is not something that's 500 years in the past. This is something that is like happened in the 1900s. Then I talk about how Taizen's son Hiromichi met with American HQ after World War II, etc., etc., etc. I talk about Hiromichi's son Takanobu, who was in Siberian prison, and then he came back, and then in real recent times, really recent times, like 1980s, 1990s, recent, like within our own lifetimes, right? He well, I don't know how old all the people listening to this are, but I'm assuming an average listening age of 35. So if you're like 20, then it doesn't. This isn't true. But if you're in your 30s, then this holds true. In your own lifetime, there was a Southern Court push. It was really small and it didn't last long, but it happened. Anyway, so now after I sort of go into that, I talk about how the reason why I mentioned all of this, the Gonansho and the Kusunoki-ryu and everything, is to put the reader into the understanding and the framework of the origin of Fukushima-ryu. You have to understand that Fukushima-ryu was created by these guys who are Southern Court loyalists, and they've studied Kusunoki-ryu or some derivation of Kusunoki-ryu. And so when you have a clear understanding of this prolonged campaign of the Southern Court and of these dynamics around it, it gives you your insight into the human beings, the men that created Fukushima-ryu is deeper. You have a more understanding of where they're coming from. And so now we'll go a little bit more and then we'll stop. So Kusunoki-ryu is a system based on military tactics which were formed by Kusunoki Masashige during the Wars of the Kemmu Restoration. Kusunoki Masashige got the majority of his tactics from the 6 secret teachings, Sun Tzu tactics, and pre-existing Genji tactics. Genji is also known as Minamoto. These tactics were passed down to Masashige's 2 sons, Masasura and Masanori. Masasura died younger, and Masanori survived into old age. Again, you can read In Praise of Spies. I have a whole chapter on Kusunoki Masanori. So the main line of Kusunoki-ryu is better known as Kusunoki Masanori-ryu, which I've already said, because really, Kusunoki-ryu is Kusunoki Masanori-ryu. Really. Because Masashige just passed it down to his 2 sons, and then Masatsura died. Then Masanori is the one who propagated it down through multiple branches and different generations and da-da-da-da-da. And that's what I'm saying here. As you read along, you see this is what I'm saying. Now, the existing Genji tactics, this is important to talk about. And I'll end this part of the commentary and I'll go into this. The pre-existing Genji tactics, and I'll get into this a little bit. There's some sort of like folklore or oral tradition or family stories that I talk about later in the book that get into that, specifically regarding like ninjutsu, which is according to the story called hijutsu, and calling it hijutsu does correlate with the historical record. Now, what's not in this book, and what I'm going to tell you now, because you've been probably listening to the commentary for something other than just me rambling, the Genji, you want to look up Genji Yoshie. Genji Yoshie is a source. Like in this book, I talk mainly about Genji Yorimitsu, but you should look up Genji Yoshie. He has got a ridiculous amount of war tactics, and that is pretty much understood to be one source, one line of Genji techniques that got its way into Kusunoki-ryu. So, of course, we have the Genji Yorimitsu, which we will discuss later, but Genji Yoshie is a big one. There is a I'm trying to think if to remember there's two manuals which appear to have a great influence onto Kusunoki, and I can't exactly remember the correct way. I can't the one of them I know that I can't exactly remember the correct way to pronounce it. It's got a weird name and it's hard to pronounce. It starts with a K. It's like Kinisitsuto or something like that. And I've looked over it. And it has a bunch. It's mostly like a bunch of magic, and it's like where a lot of the Taoism and the trigrams and the hexagrams and that a lot of that stuff comes from. Then there's another one called I think it's got a couple different names. The version I'm aware of is called, I think it's called Hijitsu Ikansho, one volume of secret arts, and that's another one that is supposed to go from Genji, and it's in the Genji. In other words, families that come from the Genji, I think like the Ogasawara family, for example, have a version of the Hijitsu Ikansho, and or had. I mean, I don't know. I've not gone to the family now and asked them, "Do you still have this?" But I think they're supposed to have it. The Hijitsu Ikansho being one version of that document, but the point is the Genji from like the 1100s had a series of war manuals. Magical, geomantric, diagrams of magic, and also war tactics, formations, techniques, and then of course they had their secret arts, their hijitsu, their spying, their ambushing, their scouting, So these all existed. So Kusunoki Masashige, when he's first forming it, he's forming it from the Chinese classics, primarily the Six Secret Teachings, Sun Tzu's Tactics, and there's a third one called the Three Teachings, and then there's other ones too, but it's mostly Six Secret Teachings and Sun Tzu's Tactics, and then the Genji material. And so the question, of course, is what Genji material? We can assume that because the actual Kusunoki-ryu text cite like Genji Yoshie, and then what is this? In other words, there's many Genji generals and different warriors that get quoted and mentioned in the Kusunoki manuals. So all we really have to do then is we have to just correlate what the Kusunoki manuals are saying about them to any other pre-existing documentation about them, historical documents or any kind of war manuals that might come from them, like for example the Hijitsu Ikansho. And it's interesting too, obviously, because there's the Kusunoki Ikansho, but prior to that there's the Hijitsu Ikansho. So anyway, but the point is that it's obvious that Kusunoki is not pulling just from the Chinese classics. Of course, he's pulling from the Genji, from various Genji sources. And of course, that's never been a secret. That's always been there in the Kusunoki manuals. But some people, I don't know, they never took the time to research that. It's not really a big kind of, a lot of people go, oh, it's a big secret. It's not really a big secret. If you just take some time and research it, you'll see that the Kusunoki-ryu is a combination of Six Secret Teachings, Sun Tzu's Tactics, and different Genji teachings. So if I don't, I will. Yeah, I don't know if I'll. I was gonna say maybe if I write a book just on Kusunoki-ryu, I might go into more depth about those Genji manuals. Because I don't have all of them. I'd have to actually locate all of them and read them to be dead on accurate with what I'm saying. But I've read some of them, and I mean you can obviously see where some of the Kusunoki-ryu is pulling directly from. And so just I'll end this segment by basically saying Kusunoki-ryu is Genji Tactics. It's Six Secret Teachings. It's heavily off Six Secret, very heavy off Six Secret Teachings, very heavy off Genji Tactics, and then it uses Sun Tzu as a general framework. All right, so the next, so hopefully that was helpful to you. Let me know if I rambled on without meaning or if that was somewhat helpful. All right, yeah.